In 1953, the CIA spent $1 million to overthrow Iran's democratically elected prime minister. But this was not about Cold War ideology. It started with an oil contract that gave one British company exclusive rights to Iran's reserves for 60 years, while Iran kept less than 20%. How did a revenue dispute trigger a covert coup that reshaped the Middle East? The real fallout would not hit for another 26 years. The 1933 oil concession between Iran and the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was more than a commercial deal. It was a financial straitjacket. The contract locked Iran into a 60-year term, giving the British company exclusive rights to explore, extract, and export oil from a vast southern zone. In return, Iran was promised a royalty of just 20% of net profits. But the fine print mattered. Net profit was calculated only after the company subtracted its own expenses, investments, and depreciation. As a result, the actual cash reaching Tehran often fell below 1% of the oil's market value. The rest flowed to London. This was not a technicality, it was the heart of the grievance. In the late 1940s, AIOC reported net revenues of £61 million in a single year. But Iran's share over nearly 50 years barely crossed £110 million. For every pound that entered the Iranian treasury, far more was siphoned off to British shareholders, and most importantly, the British state. The government in London owned a controlling stake of 51% in AIOC, turning Iranian oil into a lifeline for the British treasury. At its peak, annual dividends from Iranian oil reached £28 million, covering a significant share of Britain's post-war recovery budget. To many Iranians, oil was their birthright, yet their country remained locked out of its own wealth. The contract's nullity clause made it nearly impossible to renegotiate or revoke the terms without facing international legal action. The imbalance was not just about numbers, it was about sovereignty and dignity. This financial asymmetry became the rallying cry for nationalists who saw foreign control as an affront to Iran's independence. The stage was set for a confrontation that would quickly move from boardrooms and ledgers to parliament halls and city streets. Iran's position on the map made its oil far more than a local prize. With the Soviet Union pressing against its northern border and the Persian Gulf at its feet, Tehran found itself at the crossroads of Cold War rivalry and global energy supply. By the early 1950s, the country's vast reserves were seen in Washington and London as a shield against communist expansion and an economic lifeline for post-war Britain. But for Iranians, the oil fields represented something more basic, the right to control their own future. In March 1951, that demand for sovereignty burst into law. The Iranian parliament, the Majlis, voted unanimously to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company assets. This was not a narrow act by a single party. The coalition behind the move stretched from Mossadegh's National Front, rooted in urban professionals and students, to the Tudeh Party's leftist workers, the conservative bazaar merchants, and even segments of the religious establishment. For a brief moment, decades of political rivals stood side by side, united by the conviction that Iran's resources should serve its people. The vote transferred all Anglo-Iranian Oil Company holdings to the new National Iranian Oil Company. Overnight, the world's largest refinery at Abadan and hundreds of wells changed hands. The message was unmistakable. Iran would no longer accept foreign control, not in its economy, nor in its politics. The scale of support was impossible to ignore. Mass rallies filled Tehran's streets, and the coalition's reach extended from parliament to the smallest village council. But that same geography that gave Iran its leverage also magnified the risk. The nationalization law landed at the height of the Cold War, with British and American officials watching for any sign that a weakened Iran might slip into the Soviet orbit. What began as a fight for economic justice now threatened to redraw the region's balance of power. British retaliation after nationalization was swift and punishing. The embargo, enforced by both legal threats and naval patrols, severed Iran from its main source of foreign income almost overnight. By late 1952, the country's oil exports had collapsed by nearly 80%. Tankers stopped docking at Abadan, and international buyers, under pressure from London, refused to touch Iranian crude. The numbers told the story. Foreign exchange reserves fell from about £100 million to under £30 million in less than 2 years. Government revenue from oil, once the backbone of the state budget, shrank from over £20 million to just £5 million. Inside the Ministry of Finance, officials scrambled to fill the widening gap. Emergency loans from the World Bank did little to plug the deficit. The government imposed steep new taxes on farmers and merchants, but these measures only fueled resentment. With the Treasury bleeding cash and imports drying up, inflation soared and unemployment spread from the oil fields to the bazaars. This sudden economic squeeze created a sense of crisis that cut across politics. For Mossadegh and his allies, the embargo was not just a hardship, it was an existential threat. The pressure forced Tehran to reconsider its options, knowing that the country's fiscal survival now hinged on finding a way around the blockade or forcing a diplomatic breakthrough. The urgency for change was no longer theoretical. It was written into every budget shortfall and every pay cut for civil servants. Inside the White House, the calculus changed swiftly. National Security Council memos began to frame Iran less as a local dispute and more as a potential domino in the Cold War. By early 1953, the language in NSC 136-1 was blunt. A communist takeover in Tehran would threaten the entire Middle East oil supply. This threat assessment landed on President Eisenhower's desk, pushing the administration from cautious mediation to active intervention. The solution would not be open force, but covert action, funded, planned, and hidden from public view. A classified CIA and MI6 joint action plan soon followed. The document, signed off by Alan Dulles and British intelligence chiefs, authorized secret funding to undermine Mossadegh's government. The numbers were clear and substantial. Over $1 million from the CIA and an additional £100,000 from British coffers were earmarked for operations in Tehran. These funds were not theoretical. Ledgers show cash routed through diplomatic pouches and bank accounts, with detailed breakdowns for propaganda, political bribes, and street mobilization. Kermit Roosevelt Jr. was tapped to run the operation on the ground. His assignment was to coordinate the flow of money, recruit Iranian collaborators, and execute the plan with plausible deniability. The green light from Washington and London put the machinery of regime change into motion. The stage was now set for the most consequential covert operation of the early Cold War, a campaign where budgets and memos would soon translate into action in the streets of Tehran. In the pre-dawn hours of August 15, 1953, Tehran's streets pulsed with tension. CIA operatives funneled cash to trusted army officers and street organizers, hoping to ignite a swift overthrow. The plan unraveled almost immediately. Loyalist police intercepted orders, Mossadegh's security forces secured Radio Tehran, and the Shah, panicked by rumors of arrest, fled the country. By midday, the coup collapsed. CIA field reports logged the withdrawal of agents and the burning of documents, and failure was total, at least for the moment. But the machinery did not stop. 4 days later, Kermit Roosevelt and General Zahedi regrouped. A second wave began before dawn on August 19th, this time with sharper coordination and deeper pockets. Fresh cash, £250,000, poured into Zahedi's headquarters to buy loyalty from key military units and street gangs. Paid demonstrators, some recruited from Tehran's underworld, surged into public squares. Forged royal decrees circulated, announcing Mossadegh's dismissal and Zahedi's appointment as prime minister. At 4:30 in the morning, Zahedi's men seized Radio Tehran. Broadcasts declared the Shah's return and urged the public to support the new government. By sunrise, military units loyal to Zahedi stormed government buildings. Parliament was overrun, Mossadegh's cabinet dissolved, and by midday, Mossadegh himself was under arrest. The coup's final act was played out on the airwaves and in the streets. Radio scripts and cash drops proved as decisive as tanks and rifles. By nightfall, the contest for Iran's future had ended, not with a single battle, but with a carefully orchestrated convergence of money, propaganda, and military force. Royal decrees soon gave the Shah sweeping new powers. He could dissolve parliament, appoint ministers, and rule by fiat. In 1957, SAVAK was created with American and British backing, quickly growing into a force of over 12,000 agents. Surveillance became routine. Writers, clerics, and students lived under constant threat. Disappearances and censorship silenced opposition as the regime's grip tightened. Yet the Shah paired repression with a campaign of modernization. The White Revolution, launched in 1963, promised land reform, women's suffrage, and mass literacy. Official reports claimed millions of hectares redistributed and new schools rising across rural Iran. Factories and infrastructure projects multiplied, funded by oil and foreign loans. For the urban middle class, these changes meant progress. For many rural families and religious leaders, they felt like an attack on tradition. SAVAK's reach only grew, hunting dissent wherever it surfaced. The memory of 1953 became a rallying point for protest. Ayatollah Khomeini, exiled but defiant, called the coup proof that foreign powers would never tolerate Iranian democracy. In 1979, revolutionaries stormed the U.S. Embassy, waving CIA files and invoking 1953 as justification. The same covert script would echo in Guatemala's 1954 coup, spreading the model far beyond Iran. Iran's 1953 coup still echoes in every negotiation, sanction, and standoff between Tehran and the West. Foreign intervention didn't resolve the struggle over sovereignty, it magnified it. Today, every power play in the region carries that legacy. The past isn't distant, it is the blueprint for today's alliances and distrust.